Close your eyes for a second and imagine you're 8 years old again. Remember the TV humming with the picture slightly off. And on that TV screen is a show so weird it's unexplainable. You just had to be there. If you remember that feeling, you're one of us, because the shows we're about to revisit weren't just strange, they were the kind of strange only the 1960s could get away with. If Saturday morning television shaped you in ways that you're still discovering, hit subscribe, because we are going to spend a lot of time in places exactly like this. The Prisoner, 1967. Patrick McGoohan created this show, and it wasn't your typical television program. It was an act of artistic possession, and this description doesn't even begin to cut it. The show ended in a finale so strange that audiences rioted. McGoohan briefly fled the country to avoid the mob. What kind of show could have made the creator run away? The plot of this show is simple. A British spy resigns from his job dramatically, and then he wakes up in the village. It is beautiful with pastel-colored houses, a cafe, residents with free time, and pleasant weather. There are residents who seem perfectly content. There are leisure activities. There's even a local election. The only problem is that nobody can leave. Nobody uses names. Everyone is a number. And if you try to run, a giant white balloon called Rover rolls out of nowhere and smothers you into submission. Our man is number 6. He refuses to use that name. I am not a number, he announces every episode. I am a free man. The village just laughs. But as it turned out, this wasn't a spy show. It was a show about what happens when the system that is supposed to protect you is the same one that controls you. McGoohan said in 1977, the problem was that people had accepted being run by television, by advertisers, by governments, and never revolted. So he revolted on behalf of the people. He made this show in 1967, but think about what the world looks like now. Isn't McGoohan and his show right? The show ran for 17 episodes and was ranked one of the top cult shows in television history twice over. It influenced Lost, it echoed through The Matrix, and it is still the most accurate metaphor for modern life that a British spy program has ever accidentally produced. The next show had something far more weird. It had a talking car. My Mother the Car, 1965 to 1966. My Mother the Car ran for one season on NBC, 1965 to 1966, and the plot is strange. It's about a mild-mannered attorney named David Crabtree who buys a beat-up 1928 Porter from a used car lot. The car speaks to him through the radio, and it turns out that it's his deceased mother who's been reincarnated as an automobile. David then has to pretend to his family and neighbors that he simply has an unusual attachment to an old vehicle. In 2002, TV Guide ranked My Mother the Car the second worst television show of all time, behind only The Jerry Springer Show. The creators of this show, Alan Burns and Chris Hayward, were not incompetent. The year they made this show, they also helped create Get Smart and The Munsters. Burns went on to create The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Hayward contributed to Barney Miller. So why did they even come up with a show like this? Something must have gone wrong in production. To show how confident people were about this show succeeding, Jerry Van Dyke, who played David, rejected the role of Gilligan on Gilligan's Island and chose to do My Mother the Car instead. His decision is one of the great cautionary tales in the history of Hollywood choices. Jerry Van Dyke spent the next 3 decades living with the reputation. He finally got his career back in Coach from 1989 to 1997. He called My Mother the Car the worst decision of his professional life. Gilligan's Island ran for 3 seasons, spawned multiple films and reunion specials, and remains one of the most recognizable shows in American television history. Imagine Jerry in that show. It would have been legendary. The universe has a sense of humor. It's just not always kind. You'd think it doesn't get weirder than this show, until you see what we have for you next. Clutch Cargo, 1959 to 1960. Clutch Cargo was an adventure cartoon about a pilot who traveled the world solving problems. He's accompanied by his young ward Spinner and a dachshund named Paddlefoot. Everything sounds okay, except it's not. Clutch Cargo could not afford full animation. What they could afford was a technique called Synchrovox, invented by a cameraman named Edwin Gillette. This technique involved filming live-action footage of human mouths separately and then optically printing those mouths onto the static cartoon faces. The characters did not move. Their bodies and faces were drawings, frozen mid-pose and mid-expression. But their human mouths moved in perfect synchrony to the words. The show made people feel threatened, and science explains why. Neuroscientists call this effect the uncanny valley, the gap between human and not quite human that your brain cannot process without triggering a low-grade alarm. Reviewers who grew up watching it have described the mouths as fruit juicy red, and were distracted from the show by it. American television host and comedian Conan O'Brien was so haunted by the show's floating human lips. Then he revived the Synchrovox technique as a recurring comedy bit on his late-night show. The jokes landed because everyone who had watched in the 1960s immediately recognized the wrongness they had been carrying in their heads for 30 years. Cambria Studios produced it for $18,000 an episode. Disney, producing at the same quality level, would have spent $250,000. The creator once said, "We are not making animated cartoons. We are photographing motorized movements." But what they were making was something that should not have been made. The show was horror dressed as children's television, but this next one is something nobody is quite sure what. H.R. Pufnstuf, 1969 to 1970. This show is about a boy named Jimmy who has a magical golden flute named Freddy who can talk. One day, a bewitched boat lures Jimmy across the sea to Living Island, where every object is alive. The trees wear sunglasses, the houses sneeze, the candles have opinions. The island's mayor is a large, friendly dragon named H.R. Pufnstuf. The villain is Witchy Poo, a cackling witch who rides a rocket-powered broom called the Vroom Broom and wants the golden flute. Every week she concocts a scheme. Every week it fails. Sid and Marty Krofft made this show on a budget that was twice what NBC gave them, and nearly went broke doing it. The show was so colorful, so distinctive, so visually unmistakable that the creators have spent decades convincing people that the show wasn't inspired by drugs. Even now, the show's head writer confirmed that the psychedelic look was purely aesthetic, not symbolic. Inspired by the show, McDonald's later created McDonaldland with Mayor McCheese, the talking trees, and the living anthropomorphic landscape. The Krofft brothers sued them for copyright infringement and won. The Krofts have been collecting royalty checks from McDonald's ever since. That is the strangest corporate victory in the history of child's entertainment. If H.R. Pufnstuf and any of these just unlocked something you forgot was living in your memory, smash that like button. You are in the right place. Let's talk about the next show. It had astronauts, cavemen, and a showrunner who ran out of ideas mid-season. It's About Time, 1966 to 1967. If the Flintstones and the Jetsons had a baby, it'd be this show. Sherwood Schwartz had a style. Two characters isolated from civilization, slowly adjusting to the wrong world. It worked so well on Gilligan's Island that he decided to do it again, but from another direction. It's About Time follows two astronauts, Mac and Hector, who break the time barrier and crash land in prehistoric times. There, they promptly befriend a cave family, Gronk, Shad, and their two teenage children. The tribal boss, a man named simply Boss, spends most of the first half of the show trying to have the astronauts killed as evil spirits who dress funny. The show was well received at first, but then the ratings collapsed. Schwartz later identified 3 reasons himself. The dinosaur and club danger grew repetitive, the cave settings were genuinely unpleasant to look at, and the cavemen's fractured English was exhausting to listen to. His solution was one of the more audacious mid-season pivots in television history. The astronauts managed to fix their capsule and go home to 1967, and they bring the cave family with them. So, for the second half of the run, the show became an entirely different premise. Gronk and Shad and Breer and Malore are now in a Los Angeles apartment, encountering running water, television sets, and rocking chairs, which Shad calls the alive chair, with the same bewildered energy the astronauts had shown in the Stone Age. The show literally reversed itself at the midpoint. Same cast, same budget, opposite fish out of water arrangements. But it did not save the ratings. It was canceled after 1 season. But here is what impresses about this show. Schwartz did not abandon the season. He did not try to ride around the failing premise or quickly let it expire. He blew up the premise entirely, rebuilt it from the other end, and kept going. The show's theme song was actually rewritten, new lyrics recorded, to describe the new situation. That is either the most optimistic act of television in 1966, or the most stubbornly specific creative decision a showrunner has ever made about a dying series. Now let's continue with another show with another weird physics. The Flying Nun, 1967 to 1970. Sister Bertrell, played by a very young Sally Field, wears a cornet, the rigid white headpiece associated with certain orders of nuns. In The Flying Nun, Sister Bertrell's cornet is large enough, she is light enough, and the wind conditions near her convent in Puerto Rico are reliable enough that she achieves sustained, controllable flight. The show ran 3 seasons, and people actually liked it. What the production team did with this premise is far more interesting than the premise itself. They established rules. Sister Bertrell could not fly in the rain. High winds made her unpredictable and dangerous to herself. Her weight was a permanent factor, so gaining a few pounds could ground her. The writers maintained this internal logic with more consistency than most dramatic series maintain theirs. There was a fully engineered world behind the joke, and they took it seriously, which is exactly what makes absurdism work. And speaking of absurdity, Sally Field was 20 years old when this show started. She was a serious, classically trained actress. So, due to her training, she should have said no to the show. But she was trying to establish herself, and the show gave her the chance. But there was a problem. She felt the professional frustration. She felt trapped inside a premise that was commercially successful, but creatively limiting. Then she left, and spent the next decade fighting to be taken seriously. And she won that fight. She won 2 Academy Awards and became one of the most respected actors of her generation. The Flying Nun was lighthearted, but this next one chose darkness and changed daytime television permanently. Dark Shadows, 1966 to 1971. Picture this. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The school bus has dropped you off. You have changed out of your school clothes. And now it's Dark Shadows time. You didn't feel excited about the show at first, but you know something changed. Dark Shadows premiered on ABC in June 1966 as a gothic soap opera set at Collinwood, a brooding estate in the fictional fishing village of Collinsport, Maine, revolving around the Collins family. The opening narration, delivered by the governess Victoria Winters, set the atmosphere immediately. For 6 months, the show's ratings were bad. ABC told creator Dan Curtis to improve the show or get canceled. Curtis had an idea. He had always wanted to make a vampire picture, and so he did. In April 1967, a chained coffin was opened in the Collins family mausoleum. Out stepped Barnabas Collins. He was 175 years old and was reluctantly a vampire. He was played by Canadian actor Jonathan Frid with a combination of menace, anguish, and heartbreak that daytime television had never attempted before. Barnabas was not a monster. He was a man cursed against his will, who loathed what he was, who ached for connection and was horrified by his own compulsions. He was, in short, complicated. The ratings did not just improve. They transformed. Kids were running home from school. Teenagers were setting alarms. Adults who had never watched a soap opera in their lives were following the storyline. Then the show added werewolves, witches, time travel, parallel dimensions, and eventually had a run of 1,245 episodes. Barnabas Collins came before Anne Rice's interview with the vampire by 8 years. He came before almost every sympathetic, tortured, reluctant vampire in popular culture. The vampire who hates being a vampire, who wants to be human, who is repulsed by his own nature, and who loves too deeply and is destroyed by it. And it's all thanks to Jonathan Frid. Jonathan Frid apparently disliked the vampire element of the character intensely. He found it limiting, so he kept trying to play Barnabas as the romantic tragic hero. The character became an icon because the actor refused to play him as a monster. Sometimes the best creative decisions in television history are made by a single actor doing what feels true instead of what feels commercial. Dark Shadows was remade in 1991 and again in 2004, and Johnny Depp made a film version in 2012. None of them managed the original's specific alchemy of low-budget atmosphere, live tape urgency, and a lead actor who genuinely seemed to be grieving something. Did you catch this show when it was on? While Dark Shadows revolved around the supernatural, this next one had beings from another part of the cosmos. The Invaders, 1967 to 1968. Stop. Look at the person next to you. Check their pinky finger. Can they bend it? The Invaders premiered in January 1967 and ran 2 seasons on ABC. Roy Thins played architect David Vincent, who witnesses a UFO landing on a lone county road late one night and spends the rest of the series trying to convince a skeptical world that aliens have infiltrated human society. The aliens are indistinguishable from humans, but they cannot bend their pinky fingers, have no heartbeat, and do not bleed when cut. And when they die, they glow red and disintegrate, destroying any evidence of their existence. So David Vincent can never collect proof. Every episode, he disrupts a plan. Every episode, the evidence vanishes. Armed with a .38 revolver and a magnificent 1960s jaw, he perpetually builds a case that the universe perpetually erases. Series creator Larry Cohen has acknowledged the show was a Cold War reference. The aliens who look exactly like us, who have infiltrated our institutions, our schools, our government, our churches, are the communists who made the 1950s public paranoid. The composer Dominic Frontier created a 2-note motif that played whenever aliens were present. Second season composer Dwayne Tatro described it as a half-step thing, a minor interval, unresolved, just slightly wrong. It worked on the audience the same way the stiff pinky worked on David Vincent. Almost normal, close enough to be unsettling, far enough to make you look twice. The show ran for 43 episodes and had no definitive ending. David Vincent never wins. He never loses. He just keeps going, alone, unconvinced by nothing, and convincing nobody. In 1995, a TV movie sequel was made. Roy Thins played the now elderly David Vincent. He was still at it. Some fights do not end. They just get older. It gets even weirder from here. Captain Nice, 1967. In January 1967, 2 television networks made the same decision on the same night. NBC launched Captain Nice. CBS launched Mr. Terrific. Both were superhero comedies. Both aired on Monday. Both were canceled by August. The networks had committed a mutual disastrous mistake by scheduling them against each other. Captain Nice was created by Buck Henry, co-creator of Get Smart, and it starred William Daniels as Carter Nash, a mild-mannered police chemist who invents a serum he calls Super Juice. One swallow and he becomes Captain Nice. He chose the name on the spot to explain the initials on his belt buckle and later admitted it was all he could think of. His costume was assembled by his domineering mother from a pair of white pajamas adorned with gold stars and red stripes. He could fly, his billowing rayon cape fluttering around him as he looked, according to one reviewer, persistently nauseous. He was cowardly, neurotic, deeply reluctant, and no different as a superhero than he was as a chemist. His father, present in every episode, was always hidden behind a newspaper and could not remember Carter's name. Buck Henry spotted Daniels on a movie theater lobby card and wrote the role with his face in mind, but without remembering his name, which is itself a very Captain Nice story. The show was short-lived, but it connected Henry and Daniels. Henry cast Daniels in The Graduate the same year. Daniels later landed Knight Rider and Saint Elsewhere, in part because a producer at NBC remembered Captain Nice and thought of him. The show that had a short shelf life kept opening doors for a decade afterward. The anxious superhero, the one for whom the power is a burden, not a gift, whose real enemy is his own reluctance, had aired in 1967. Every reluctant hero who came after him owes this to a fictional chemist who named himself after his belt buckle. And then, finally, we arrived at the show that broke every rule. The Monkees, 1965 to 1968. You already know this one. The Monkees premiered in September 1966. The plan was to create a manufactured prop group for a scripted television show. Screen Extras Guild rules prevented the actors from forming a real band initially, so session musicians played most of the instruments. The 4 members, Davy Jones, Mike Nesmith, Peter Tork, and Mickey Dolenz, were chosen by audition, not by musical ability. They were, in the language of 1966 music journalism, a fake band playing to a script about a real band. The Monkees knew this. And here is what most people forget about the show. The Monkees responded to their own manufactured nature by making one of the most formally experimental television programs of the decade. Episodes broke the fourth wall constantly. Characters addressed the camera. Storylines acknowledged that they were storylines. Musical numbers appeared in the middle of dramatic scenes for no reason the plot could justify. There was an episode in which the show simply stopped pretending to be a show. There was a film, Head, 1968, so deliberately designed to dismantle the Monkees' image that the studio refused to advertise it, and it became one of the great cult films of the era. They were not fighting to be taken seriously as musicians. They were fighting to be taken seriously as people who knew exactly what was being done to them and had decided to respond to it with genuine art. The Monkees sold more records in 1967's than the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined. That fact alone should tell you something about the distance between commercial success and being understood. The show ran 2 seasons and ended when the members chose not to continue. Davy Jones, Mike Nesmith, Peter Tork, and Mickey Dolenz were all real people who happened to be assembled by committee. That they made something worth remembering is not despite that fact. It might be because of it. None of them knew what they were making. The Prisoner didn't know it was a surveillance allegory. Dark Shadows didn't know it was inventing the sympathetic vampire. The Monkees did not know they were making art. They were just making television. And it burned itself into a generation anyway. Some things do not need to know what they are to matter. You don't need to know who you are before you matter. Share this with someone who watched the 1960s with you or someone who wished they had been there. Until next time, take very good care of yourselves.